Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you. Yeah, the meeting is called to order. Can I ask if you to close the doors? Good morning, everyone. I am Suad Aden Osman. I work for CODA. Welcome to Addis Ababa. Welcome to the African Union. We are pleased to see you all. We are happy to welcome the scholars from the Global South and some from the Global North. Kai, welcome. I will just introduce the chair of the session, of the first session, and maybe give a few more information on household for health reasons. The restrooms are on the, as you leave the room, on the left-hand side. We have also a secretariat room for any need you may have. The team is actually in the room. Abiot, Getachew, Anil, Adam, Abel. But should you need anything else, please, including administrative matters, we are handling them in the secretariat. I would like to welcome His Excellency, Dr. Abdullah Hamdok, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Sudan, who kindly accepted to open our conference. It's a conference organized, it's the third conference of ideas on monetary and economic sovereignty. And this time, because it's happening in Addis Ababa, we happily hosted it as CODA, the Coalition for Dialogue on Africa. We are a special initiative of the African Union, hence our presence in this compound. I would like to introduce Dr. Tsotsi Tsikata, Professor of Development Sociology, who has been Director of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana since 2016. Before that, she was based at the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economic Research, during which time she was Deputy Director and Director of the Center for Gender Studies and Advocacy, also at the University of Ghana. She has a PhD in social science from Leiden University in Netherlands in a career spanning over 30 years. Professor Tsikata teaching, research, and publications have been in the areas of gender and development policies and practices, the politics of and livelihoods of effects on land tenure reforms, large-scale land acquisitions, and agriculture commercialization. She is in the immediate past are you still president of the Council for Development of Social Sciences? Okay, Codesria, no longer. Prof. Tsotsi is also active in the leadership of several leading policy advocacy networks in Africa, including the Network for Women Rights in Ghana, Third World Network Africa, and the Center for Democracy and Development, Abuja. Prof, over to you.
Thank you so much, Swat, for that introduction. So good morning, all of you. I want to warmly welcome you to the third edition of the African Monetary and Economic Sovereignty AIMS Conference. This edition is a collaboration between IDEAS and the Coalition for Dialogue on Africa, CODA, which also served as Secretariat of the African Union's high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa. First of all, I want to welcome and recognize HE Dr. Abdullah Hamdok, Alternative Chair of CODA, the CODA Board. I also want to mention Ambassador Segun Akpata, member of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows, Andres Arauz, economist, Jomo Kwame Sundaram, founding member of IDEAS and first chair of the executive committee and a member of the CODA board and keynote speaker at this conference, Fadel Kabou, economist, also keynote speaker, Martin Guzman, another keynote speaker, Jason Hickel, professor at Barcelona University, another keynote speaker. I especially mentioned the keynote speakers, not because they are the only important people in this room, but I thought it was good to acknowledge that they'll be leading some of the key discussions we'll be having in this conference. I also recognize Charles Abugwe, Executive Director of Ideas, and Suad Adenosman from CODA for their foresight in forging this partnership, which we hope will endure for the benefit of our two organizations and also for the benefit of the work that they do to build a better Africa and a better global South. I want to recognize the members of Ideas, particularly Ndongo Silla, who is the moving spirit behind this conference. The first conference was his idea. I also want to mention Getachew Alemu from CODA for working together with Congo to bring this conference to life. Last but not least, I want to recognize each and every one of you in this room and the participants who are online, particularly our panelists, the policymakers, ex-policymakers, civil society activists, and academics. You are most welcome. I think it's together that we can have a great conference. So this third conference is on the theme leveraging multipolarity, economic options for Africa. We know that multipolarity is being hotly debated and it's quite topical amongst those who are arguing that it does not yet exist, given that only the US and China have serious economic power and leverage, and those who are more optimistic about the significance of emerging powers, particularly those from the global South and those organized under the umbrella of BRICS Plus. There are many signs that we who feel that a multipolar world is in the making need to temper our optimism with about the benefits of multipolarity. The endless bombardment and carnage in Gaza, the West Bank, and now Lebanon, and the looming war in the Middle East has been made possible because of the limits of multipolarity in our time. The current debt development and climate crisis in Africa have their roots in years of imposition of neoliberal economic and social policies and a broken global financial architecture, which remains influential today. Lastly, the disturbing decline of civic space, the rise of authoritarian populism, cultural wars, and conservative attacks on women's hard-won rights, attacks on the LGBT communities, youth activists, and other minorities is happening across different poles of power in the world. This conference, therefore, provides the space and opportunity to engage critically, soberly, and more concretely with the implications of multipolarity for Africa at this conjuncture. We in Africa can agree that there's an emergent, though not stable, multipolar world, which is a good thing for a region which is on the margins of the centers of global power. However, I believe that Africa is not organized and committed to the fight for leverage, given the continuing embrace of the neoliberal agenda and the deepening class, gender, generational, and regional divides and inequalities within our countries, and also the entrenched interests that maintain these differences. In any case, our experiences with past efforts to contribute to multipolarity, such as the New International Economic Order, the Bandung Conference, the Tricontinental Initiatives, suggest that multipolarity can be fragile, it can be ineffective, and it can be ephemeral. As the concept note of this conference asks, what new or alternative options can this multipolarity offer us? And what economic opportunities could we foresee in a world where the West no longer has the last word? I want to add my own question to this. What kind of multipolarity should we be striving for? And what principles should we push to enshrine in the multipolar world? I certainly think that a commitment to multilateralism, a just world order, and reducing inequalities and discrimination between people and countries should be the cornerstone of governments and institutions of the multipolar world we strive for. You can see from the conference's agenda that it is very rich in possibilities. We'll be discussing lessons from the past and what to do about the current debt development and climate crisis. I'm particularly gratified that we will engage with the agenda of the forthcoming Financing for Development Conference in Sevilla by looking at questions of both domestic and international resource mobilization, including issues such as taxation, illicit financial flows, climate finance, financing social policy, and so on and so forth. This is an opportunity to review the Addis Ababa Action Agenda of the third FFD of 2015, which document also noted that there was plenty of unfinished business from the first FFD, which produced the Monterey Consensus of 2002. More than great language to push for a consensus document, I think the issues of implementation and accountability should be front and center of what Africa brings to the Sevilla Agenda for Action. The conference also wants to discuss BRICS Plus, leveraging agendas such as de-dollarization and de-globalization, monetary integration and delinking strategies, rethinking Pan-Africanism, and ending unequal ecological exchanges. I'm certain that you're as excited as I am by the agenda of this meeting, and also by the talents that we have around the table. To get the conference going, I'd now like to introduce Charles Abugwe and ask him to make some opening remarks. Charles is the current Executive Director of IDEAS, a development economist trained at the University of Ghana and the Institute of Social Studies at the Netherlands. His research areas are in public finance, poverty, inequalities, and natural resource governance. He has co-authored publications on international taxation and tax justice, Africa debt and development finance, and is a regular contributor to the African Governance Report and the Africa Economic Report published by the UNSCA. Previously, he was a senior public servant with the government of Ghana, a regional director for the UN Millennium Campaign, and head of research and policy at Christian Aid UK, and a lecturer at Swansea University in the UK. He serves as a non-executive director of the Tax Justice Network, among others. Charles has extensive experience with various consultancies and missions related to evaluations, reviews, program development, capacity development, research and analysis, both within Ghana and the UK, but also across Africa. So Charles, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. And Your Excellency, I know Your Excellency Abdallah Hamdok is an old friend of mine. He's very uncomfortable with friends calling him Your Excellency, but I'm afraid I have to insist in this space. On behalf of IDEAS and CODA, once again, welcome you and to thank you for the time to open this conference for us. I also just want to add to George's, appreciation and of all of us being here, and look forward to a very engaging discussion the next 2.5, 3 days. I shall limit my remarks to these welcome notes, as I have an opportunity to make more substantive remarks on the theme following this session. So thank you very much once again for coming, and look forward to a really exciting 3 days.
Thank you. I now would like to call on Dr. Ndongo Sambasila to tell us a bit about the conference. Ndongo is the head of research and policy for Africa, for the Africa region of IDEAS. Ndongo has been so modest, he refused to put himself on the program. And so I'm very happy that he got dragged here to show his face. Ndongo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Socio-Ecological. Son Excellence, Premier ministre Abdallah Hamdok, Excellences, chers ambassadeurs, chers invités, collègues et camarades, c'est un plaisir de vous accueillir ici à Addis Abeba, à l'Union africaine, pour la 3e édition de la conférence sur la souveraineté économique et monétaire de l'Afrique. Je commencerai d'abord par remercier Son Excellence, Premier ministre Abdallah Hamdok, nous avoir fait l'honneur de sa présence ici aujourd'hui parmi nous. remercier également l'Union africaine de nous avoir accueillis ici dans ses locaux pour notre conférence. Cette conférence n'aurait pas pu voir le jour sans le partenariat entre IDEAS, International Development Economic Associates, et CODA, la coalition pour le dialogue sur l'Afrique. Et donc, c'est l'opportunité ici de remercier CODA vraiment pour son implication phénoménale dans l'organisation de cette conférence, et en particulier Madame Swat Aden Osman, qui a toujours été cheminée à nos côtés pour ces différentes initiatives. Cette conférence sur la souveraineté économique et monétaire de l'Afrique, c'est la 3e édition. La première édition a eu lieu en 2019. C'est une initiative qui vient de 3 personnes. Professeur Kai Kodembo, qui est ici présent et qui aurait pu nous joindre ici, mais qui n'a pas voulu. Maha Bengada, qui n'a pas pu nous rejoindre aujourd'hui, qui est basé à Tunis, et moi-même. Et donc, à l'époque, les questions qui se posaient en Afrique, c'était déjà la question de la souveraineté monétaire en Afrique francophone avec la problématique du CFA et les luttes contre le franc CFA. Mais il y avait également tous ces projets de monnaie unique régionale en Afrique de l'Ouest avec la CEDEAO et aussi en Afrique de l'Est et même au niveau continental avec le projet d'une monnaie unique continentale pour l'Afrique. Mais le contexte, c'était également la crise de la zone euro et qu'est-ce qu'on pouvait apprendre, nous, Africains, par rapport à nos projets d'intégration monétaire. Et donc, ce sont ces questions-là, en relation également avec le développement dans les pays du Nord de la théorie monétaire moderne, qui donnait aussi une nouvelle approche des questions monétaires. Et donc, c'est ces différentes influences qui nous ont conduits à nous dire il faudrait peut-être avoir une conférence sur la souveraineté monétaire de l'Afrique pour tirer des enseignements globaux par rapport à ce que nous devons faire pour nous libérer de divers legs, notamment des legs coloniaux. Et donc, la première conférence est tenue en 2019 à Tunis avec la collaboration de la Fondation Rosa Luxembourg et a abouti à la publication de ce livre qui a été édité par moi-même et d'autres collègues qui s'appelle Economic and Monetary Sovereignty in 21st Century Africa. Et donc, la 2e édition a eu lieu à Dakar en 2022 et le livre qui en dérive va être publié au 1er trimestre de l'année prochaine. Et donc, ce livre porte notamment sur la question de la souveraineté économique et monétaire, mais avec un accent sur les stratégies de déconnexion, la crise écologique et les questions de réparation. Et donc, dans le contexte de cette conférence, il y a beaucoup d'aspects symboliques. L'un des premiers aspects symboliques, c'est d'être ici à l'UA, parce que bien évidemment, la question de la souveraineté économique et monétaire de l'Afrique ne date pas d'aujourd'hui. Il faut se rappeler qu'en 1963, quand l'organisation de l'Union africaine était créée, on avait même un discours de Kwame Nkrumah disant qu'il faut que l'Afrique s'unisse pour être plus forte. Et Nkrumah appelait à une intégration monétaire, financière, basée également sur les principes du fédéralisme politique. Et donc, c'est un sujet qui n'est pas nouveau. Mais le contexte dans lequel nous sommes est quelque part nouveau et aussi symbolique à plusieurs égards. Cette année-ci, on a fêté d'une certaine manière le 4e anniversaire de la naissance des institutions de Bretton Woods au mois de juillet de cette année. La conférence de Bretton Woods a cimenté d'une certaine manière le pouvoir des États-Unis et des pays du Nord sur le système financier et économique mondial. Les pays du Sud, comme l'Afrique notamment, l'Asie, n'ont pas pris part à cette conférence pour la plupart. Mais les pays du Sud ont lancé l'agenda du nouvel ordre économique international, New International Economic Order, en 1974, au sein des Nations Unies. Et donc, le 50e anniversaire, c'est cette année. Et ça a été célébré avec l'emphase qu'il fallait, Cuba notamment avec Progressive International. Et ici, nous avons un des représentants, coordinateur de Progressive International, David Adler, qui a tenu à faire le déplacement. Et donc, comme le professeur Dodji Sikata l'a rappelé, il y aura aussi la prochaine conférence FFT, qui est aussi très importante. Il y a des tendances également qui justifient l'organisation de cette conférence. On a vu le développement des BRICS, qui sont devenus maintenant les BRICS+. On voit toutes ces tendances en termes de dédollarisation. On voit également que pendant que les pays du Nord parlent de post-néolibéralisme, la plupart des pays du Sud sont englués dans des crises de dette, notamment en Afrique. On a vu des pays comme le Ghana, l'Éthiopie, le Kenya faire défaut. Et on a vu d'une certaine manière le retour des programmes d'ajustement structurel dans un contexte de détresse climatique et environnementale. Et donc, IDEAS n'est pas resté inactif parce que durant cette année, nous avons fait un certain nombre d'événements internationaux sur ces questions. À Accra, à Amherst, à Rio, nous avons fait des conférences sur ces questions. Comment réformer le système financier international? Comment mettre fin aux crises de dette? Comment avoir des mécanismes de restructuration de la dette souveraine qui préservent l'emploi, la prospérité dans les pays du Sud? Et donc, tout ça, ça a été fait et cette conférence s'inscrit dans cette lignée. Et donc, tous ces thèmes seront discutés durant cette conférence de 3 jours. Et donc, cette conférence, comme vous l'avez vu, rassemble des décideurs politiques, des universitaires, des membres des sociétés civiles venus de tous les coins du monde. Parce que le principe de cette conférence qui porte sur l'Afrique, ce n'est pas seulement d'inviter les Africains, mais de convoquer tous les savoirs qui puissent être bénéfiques à l'Afrique, d'où qu'ils viennent. Et donc, je vous souhaite à tous et à tous un excellent séjour à Addis et aussi des échanges productifs durant ces 3 jours de conférence. Et donc, merci de votre attention et de votre solidarité.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ndongo Silla, for setting out so clearly the agenda of the conference, its genesis, the particular situation we find ourselves in, and our expectations for this conference. So we now come to a high point in this opening session of the conference, and this is the remarks from our guest of honor. And I'd like to introduce him first. Although HE Dr. Abdallah Hamdok needs no introduction, I think it's good for those few people who may not know him to hear a bit more about him. So as we all know, he's the alternative chair of the CODA board, but but he also happens to have been Sudan's 15th prime minister. And prior to this, he had a long career in public service in international organizations as well as in the private sector. From 1981 to 1987, he served as a senior official in the Sudanese Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning. In the 1990s, he held senior positions first at Deloitte and Touche, the International Labour Organization in Zimbabwe, and the African Development Bank in Cote d'Ivoire. H.E. Hamdok was the Regional Director for Africa and the Middle East of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance from 2003 to 2008. He worked for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in 2001 and 2002 as Director of Regional Integration and Trade, and from 2011 to October 2018 as the Deputy Executive Secretary. Following the transfer of power from the Transitional Ministry to the Sovereign Council of Sudan, the Sovereign Council appointed H.E. Abdallah Hamdok as Prime Minister for the 2019 Sudanese transition to democracy. He was sworn in on 21st August 2019. Dr. Hamdok holds a BSc from the University of Khartoum and a PhD in Economic Studies from the University of Manchester in the UK. So, dear H.E. Hamdok, please address. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. I think the Chair has maybe saved us from acknowledging. I know so many people here. Let me just go straight to the speech. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure on behalf of CODA and IDEAS to welcome you all to the 3rd Conference on African Monetary and Economic Sovereignty. I would like to thank the African Union Commission for hosting our meeting. I would also like to thank the Ethiopian government and people for their generous hospitality in this beautiful city, the capital of Africa, Addis Ababa. Our meeting today is taking place at a time when my country, Sudan, a founding member of the Organization of African Unity, is facing one of the most serious and catastrophic humanitarian crises in the world. We do appreciate all the efforts of the regional and international partners and friends in supporting the Sudanese people during these challenging times. We hope, working together, we can reach a solution that will bring or put an end to this crisis and bring lasting peace to the people of Sudan. There is no doubt we are in a turbulent phase in the global affairs, which calls for a proper understanding of what is going on and for Africa to determine what it needs to do to survive the turbulence and indeed thrive in a new world. It is therefore essential to bring the best of academics and policymakers from across Africa and the rest of the world to deliberate on this important matter. Indeed, CODA, the strength lies in convening policy dialogues of this nature. It is through continuous exchange of views and constructive collaboration that the ideas which Africa needs for its economic development can be generated, disseminated, and acted upon. It is also why CODA's partnership with the International Development Economics Association associates ideas, a network of progressive thinkers from around the world is an important one. This conference is timely and relevant, and we have expectations for positive and workable outcomes to help inform Africa's engagement at the global forums. We're experiencing changing geopolitical dynamics and an emerging multipolar world, which is characterized by outright conflict involving nuclear powers, changing economic strengths of nations, restive populations, and lack of state restraint. We are therefore required to rethink global arrangements which came about after the end of the Second World War. Many of the political and economic arrangements put in place then are no longer fit for purpose. Most notable in this regard are the peace and security architecture and the global financial architecture. At the same time, the world faces a climate sustainability crisis, which compels us to rethink the entire production paradigms. I think at least just for the last day or two, we've been observing for probably the fourth or fifth times in a row, those hurricanes in Florida. For those who are denying the existence of climate change, this is a vivid testimony for that. In Africa, the situation is fraught with complexities. We are not at the table at the inception of the United Nations and Bretton Woods system, whose workings have always placed us at a disadvantage. We are stuck in a dilemma of preferring wholesale change while having to work within the system because of global power dynamics and the need to accommodate their interest. If we take the ultimate objective of structural transformation as given, the two main challenges facing Africa today are related to inadequate financial resources for development and a looming debt crisis. These are very much features of the international financial system and the global tax regime, as their effect combine to cause African countries to face continuous illiquidity and fiscal deficits. Economic growth is reliant on the ability to pay for investments, but we struggle to find the resources to underpin growth because of illicit financial flows and continuous search for foreign exchange to pay for the vital imports. These are the origins of the periodic debt crisis that African countries face as they scramble to meet their domestic and international obligations. In addition, the arrangements we have, such as the currencies we rely on for transactions and trade, reflect the reality of economic power and the interest of colonial powers. Africa options are clear as it faces staggering development challenges requiring increasing financial needs. It has been estimated, for instance, that Africa faces a post-COVID financing gap of over 432 billion US dollars, with close to 50 million people at risk of extreme poverty. We must find solutions at the domestic level while at the same time seeking better workings of the global financial system. Our priority, of course, is to improve domestic resource mobilization so as to reduce dependence on official development assistance, which is in any case declining over the time, while at the same time ensuring predictability in the resources needed for development. Success in this regard would, of course, require increasing fiscal capacity through growth, improving tax administration, stemming illicit financial flows in the commercial, criminal, and corrupt forms, and working with the international community to improve transparency and eliminate fiscal secrecy jurisdictions. Illicit financial flows from Africa, 2/3 of which are commercial, also contribute to restricting fiscal space in the continent. Updated figures, building on the work of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa, show that Africa loses at least 80 billion US dollars per annum from illicit financial flows, and it is increasing. And I'm very delighted to see Ambassador Shegun Apata here, one of the leading members of the panel, who really contributed to putting the issue of illicit financial flows on the agenda, not only of the continent, but also for the globe. And you remember so well the third Financing for Development conference, which was held here in Addis Ababa, deliberated on this issue. And there was, I think, not a statement, but also a resolution about this. Have we managed to address it? No. It is on the agenda, but the fact that it is increasing, it calls for more action. This is more than double the amount of official, the 80 billion. It is more than double of the amount of the official development assistance given to Africa countries. Also crucial is the need to avert a generalized debt crisis in the continent. Africa's debt built up has had a deep and sustained impact on a number of countries, fiscal space, and development prospects. Public debt in Africa has doubled since 2010, growing from 32.7% of GDP in that year in 2010 to almost 65% GDP in 2022. Amidst these financial and fiscal challenges, African countries must continue to service their debt, but they continue to face difficulties using the common framework for debt treatment, which is official global approach. These difficulties are linked to the changed global landscape, including the greater importance of the private creditors and the emergence of China as a major official creditor. This has meant that the arrangements put in place to manage the debt crisis of the 90s are no longer workable. If rising debt vulnerabilities are not quickly and properly addressed, Africa could face a widespread and far-reaching sovereign debt crisis. The good news is that Africa now has the opportunity to contribute to making the required changes. Apart from the success of the Organization of African Unity in bringing about decolonization and ending apartheid, we now have the African Union and the African Continental Free Trade Area to bring about integration and increase bargaining strengths with the rest of the world. Irrespective of teething problems, the admission of the African Union into the G20 must be welcomed, and our role is to come up with the ideas and strategic thinking to help the continent make the best use of this opportunity. Moreover, Africa has the potential to significantly influence the direction of the green transition through exposure to strong sunlight and ownership of strategic minerals. It has been argued that the sun can meet all the world's energy needs. Additionally, continent controls significant amounts of strategic minerals essential for green technology, including cobalt, platinum, manganese, chromite, bauxite, graphite, and vanadium, to mention but a few. Therefore, Africa must insist on value addition within the continent, as the global green transition is nearly impossible without these resources. By leveraging its natural advantage, Africa can assert greater control over its economic development and play a pivotal role in shaping sustainable practices worldwide. Let me then mention some of the issues that this conference might or should or be able to address in greater details to contribute to the fairer world we would like to see. I'm thinking about 4 areas. First, we should make proposals to ensure successful negotiation of the UN tax convention to ensure a fairer allocation of taxation rights to African countries, and that we have voice in the process. 2, contribute to developing proposals on how African countries can best work with external partners to avert generalized debt crisis in the continent that takes account of the need for the resources to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. 3, formulate proposals for the reform of the international financial architecture that takes account of Africa's needs, especially climate financing, structural transformation, and foreign exchange liquidity, and which gives it voice in global financial matters. 4th and last, continue insisting on a just transition and local value addition in the context of climate and sustainable development policies. I'm not aware of any country in the world that have developed without going through a rigorous and meticulous and very well thought industrial policy. It's key. It is imperative that this third African Monetary and Economic Sovereignty Conference come up with innovative means of tackling these challenges. We do not have the political might nor the economic power to make wholesale changes, no matter how pressing and necessary. We should therefore deploy policy and analytical insights to help Africa steer a steady progressive course in this rapidly changing world. I look forward to stimulating exchange of views and positive outcome with workable recommendations. And thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, His Excellency Dr. Abdallah Hamdok, for this wide-ranging and agenda-setting opening remarks. I think I probably speak for the meeting when I say that we need to promote these remarks to the opening keynote, because the 4 items on the agenda that H.E. Abdallah Hamdok has set, I think really will find favor with this group. And I hope that many of the insights from that speech will influence our deliberations. I'm quite sure this will happen. I would like now to open the floor for this wide-ranging and agenda-setting opening remarks. I think I probably speak for the meeting when I say that we need to promote these remarks to the opening keynote, because the 4 items on the agenda that H.E. Abdallah Hamdok has set, I think really will find favor with this group. And I hope that many of the insights from that speech will influence our deliberations. I'm quite sure this will happen. I would like now to open the floor for anyone who might want to react or ask questions or affirm or just speak about what we've heard this morning from our first keynote address.
This is actually an opportunity to engage Dr. Hamdok, who will have to leave us after the coffee break because he has other meetings, and he's in Addis Ababa for that. He graced our opening ceremony.
Yes, please. Can you mention your name and then ask your question?
Thank you very much. My name is Andrés Arauz. I am from Ecuador, South America, and currently affiliated with the Center for Economic and Policy Research in DC. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to His Excellency, former Prime Minister Hamdok. I would just like to pose a question on the green transition. And you mentioned the importance to leverage Africa's natural resources and mining endowment in the context of this energy transition that can only happen with Africa's natural resources. I would perhaps ask how to go about leveraging that in terms of concrete, coordinated, unilateral action from the countries of the Global South and Africa in particular, considering the fact that the countries of the Global North, like the United States and European countries, have already set up an association of mining buyers, right? A buyers club for critical minerals, as they call them. So excuse me for that. I would like a bit more details.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mine is not really a question, is to place on record our gratitude to Prime Minister Hamdok for all you have done for Africa. And I dare say for almost half a century, your energy, your sacrifice, for those of us who had known your untiring efforts, even when you are challenged, were grateful to you. You mentioned one among the 4 issues that we should focus on, the negotiations that will begin early in the new year in New York on the efforts towards a UN task convention. You and I and a couple of us have been involved in all sorts of negotiations that led to internationally legally binding instruments, whether it's law of the sea, the Climate Change Convention, Biodiversity Convention, etc., etc. I think the negotiations that will begin in January, perhaps, just a suggestion for you, at least for the African members who will be playing a critical role in these negotiations, it might be useful for CODA and ideas, if you can, to organize some meeting or that we can bring together those who can share ideas with them with the negotiations that we assemble in New York on the nitty-gritty of what they are entering into, on how they can mobilize themselves, not just the Global South, but other participants towards the end objective, like it has happened in other situations before. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I see our colleague at the back there. You have the floor. Please introduce yourself.
Okay. I hope this is going to work. Yes, it is. My name is Kayode Akintemi. I'm the Managing Director and Editor-in-Chief of News Central Television, a Pan-African news television station based in Nigeria. We're transmitting across Africa on DSTV. Now, my question is probably not completely to do with your keynote address, but we don't get an opportunity to ask or comment when we have somebody of your caliber from the continent. So I would take my chances that you'll be able to express opinion about this. The issue for me is I keep wondering, do you see a future in the next 5 to 10 years where the AFCFTA will gather enough momentum and enable Africa to have single currency across the continent and possibly open border where we will not be asked for visa across the continent? And if that happens over the next 5 to 10 years, what do you think that will do for trade and growth of the continent? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Do we have any other? Yes, please. This thing
I know. South Africa hosts the G20 meeting next year, following on Brazil. South Africa is also a central player in the BRICS agenda. The African Union is some member or the other of the G20. So the South African presidency of the G20 offers some opportunities for taking forward an African agenda. If you were wearing a UNECA hat, what would you suggest should be the key areas of consideration for a South African presidency of the G20.
Thank you very much. I see no hands around the table, so I'd like to turn over the meeting to His Excellency Abdallah Hamdok to react to some of the questions that have been raised. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, I wished I have time to be in the conference for the 3 days so that I would be interacting with you. These are some of the very important and serious issues that we would like to talk at them at length, not just in a short response. But let me take them one after the other. On the friend from Ecuador, the question of the how do we influence the green transition through our possession of the vital elements. This, I think we can only influence if we are acting together. If we join hands, not only Africa, but the global South. If we work together, we will be able to go a long way. I don't want to repeat that Africans say when, what is it? If you want to go far, go alone. If you go further, go together. I think this is a candidate for joint work. And there is very serious leverage that can be observed here if we join hands together working on this. The danger is those who are in power would want to take us individually and sign agreements with each country individually. And this is a very slippery slope. If we go through that, we all fail. So I think we have to be conscious about this. And I'm absolutely sure the current world, which does not have a unipolar that would dictate on everybody, it's an opportunity. If we exploit it well, we should be able to also dictate our terms. But that depends on us. Let's stop blaming the external power all the time. Ambassador, but I think in the same vein, the issue of the UN tax convention, I think the good news is that initially this was the initial proposals of the tax regime were contributed. Maybe probably it's a good network of research, OECD. But the fact that it's now being discussed at the UN level is a step in the right direction, which brings voice and power. I think if Africa and the global South and the rest, many in the world, work together, they will go a long way in doing that. But I take your advice about CODA taking this issue and working together with the representatives in New York by creating an opportunity like this to exchange ideas, but also create alliances. And not only that, but also understanding the issues. Because at time we will be at disadvantages because our policymakers, people who will represent us, will be going to this meeting ill-equipped. So this is important for it to happen. My brother Coyote on the network. I'm happy for your remark about, the convention is that this opening speeches, they read them and leave the room and all that without this. When they ask me if it is impossible for me to stay on after the opening and to take some questions, I said, this is excellent. I would have actually wished not to read a statement. It would be much better to have an interactive process from the beginning. But thank you so much for all these excellent questions. I think the issue of the agenda of the integration in Africa, although we brag about this beautiful building, AU, we are moving in the right direction and all that, but still there are issues which links to probably not trade-off, but the ability to forego some of the national sovereignty in the interest of the globe, of the global sovereignty of the continent. We need to move in that direction. I think the continental free trade area is the right thing. Will it happen in the next 5 years? I don't know. I don't think so. But let me tell you this. There is an anecdote which was, I think, one of the comrades from South Africa during the struggle against apartheid was asked in the 70s, 74, I think exactly, when this apartheid will end. He said in the next 10 years. Of course, but he said, I'm certain it will end. Took 20 years. But that conviction and that determination that it will end, we need to have that. We need to work together because we have no future by standing behind these small flags. If we heeded Nkrumah's appeal from the 60s, we would have been in a better place. But I think it will happen, but it will not happen from man, God, or from man. We have to work on it. And this is an issue should not be left to the governments, civil society, the African people, and all that. We should all work together in making this happen. I think the last issue, Charles, about the G20 and the membership of the African Union, I think I said it in the statement. This is an opportunity. It's a good thing, but we need to engage it through analytical and rigorous work and researching rather our agenda, whether it is debt, G20 could bring a lot of good things to the continent. And I think if we go there with a clear understanding and agenda, and I'm sure, Charles, this is a candidate for an institution like the ECA to be able to work and be, or rather follow, embrace, work with the African Union together with the rest of the other Pan-African institutions in articulating an African position. And I think most of the greater ideas that came from the continent happened because we work together. The UN system, the UN Commission, United Nations Economic Commissions were actually created precisely because of that. At the dawn of independence, late 50s, early 60s, these commissions came about because there was deficiency at the national level. We should continue playing that role. Otherwise, we lose our relevance and reason date. I'll stop here and thank you very much for all this. Thank you, Chair.
So on behalf of CODA, on behalf of IDEAS, and on behalf of all conference participants, I wish to thank you for your insightful keynote, your willingness to take questions, and your serious engagement and reflections on the questions that you heard. We understand fully why you cannot be with us for the 3 days. Urgent matters are calling. We wish you all the best with the efforts to bring a durable and just peace to Sudan. Know that all of us in Africa are behind you. We really want Sudan to work. So thank you. Thank you so much. May I ask Swad to?
Yes, no, thank
I'm
you.
handing back to the real power.
Yes, the power of the people is always the real one. Thank you very much. Few more household information. We are on the second floor of the conference building. There is no coffee, tea, or food that is served here. So for all our coffee breaks and lunches, we will take the elevator back down to the ground floor or the stairs. And that's what we're going to do immediately after this session. But before we let His Excellency Abdullah Hamdok go, we would like to take a group photo, CODA being a coalition of people and institutions. We like to show that we have gathered people. So if you don't mind to be part of that picture, we will take it under the rising sun of the African Union. Our team will lead us to that, Excellency, if you don't mind. I think Charles would like to provide some information on the next session. Please go ahead, Charles.
Sorry, Excellency. We have Jeffrey Sachs making some comments in the next 15 minutes. He has only half an hour for us. So may I suggest that after the photo, we come and listen before we go and have our tea.
It's not practical. We are downstairs.
Let's see how it works out. All right, so let us move to the coffee break. Thank you very much, everyone.
We are not going to do it. Thank you so much. This speech, are we going to get it?
Yeah,
Please. I really would like to. Thank you. Yeah, so.
Excellent.
But-
This is a small gift for you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so try and bring us back, we'll try. Please have like. They will come back. You have to know something. They will. Yeah.
Could you kindly follow the team downstairs? Thank you very much.
Sweet talking. It's too disruptive.
But because of history.
Hello.
Check what?
Oh.
Check.
So I am speaking to myself. Okay, so welcome back. We are honored to be addressed by Professor Sachs. So before I introduce him, first our sincere apologies for running quite late. Do let us know when you need to go, since we have overrun a good part of our time. But please bear with us. Professor Sachs is, as you know, is very widely recognized for bold and effective strategies to address complex development challenges. He is many things. Is very few. Most people, he doesn't need much introducing, but just a few additional words about Prof. Sachs. He serves as the director of the Center for State Sustainable Development at Columbia University, where he holds a rank of university professor, the university's highest academic rank. Sachs was director at the F Institute at Columbia from 2002 to 2016. He is president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He's the co-chair of the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition. He's an academician of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences at the Vatican, where I think he currently is. He will be speaking to us from Rome, as I understand. He's been a commissioner of the UN Broadband Commission for Development. Professor Sachs has authored many books and many articles, and co-authored many books and many articles. I think with these few words, may I invite Professor Sachs to address us? And once again, apologies for keeping you waiting. This is Charles Abugri here.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Greetings to everybody, and I'm delighted to be part of this session. I will have to be brief, unfortunately, because of the timing, but I hope that I can be helpful, and I especially hope that I can be helpful in follow-up as well. I know that your discussion is about monetary and economic sovereignty of Africa. Let me start by saying how important this theme is, and especially how important African economic, financial, infrastructural, political unification are in our world. All regions of the world have the need to create more effective regional groups. That's because the nature of technology and geopolitics requires a scale now that is larger than the nation state. I like to emphasize that China, India, and Africa all have the same population today, 1.4 billion people. But because of history, China is a unified state. India is a unified state, although it was a larger state before, but it is 1.4 billion and the most populous state in the world. Africa is 55 countries in the African Union, every one of which, even the giants, are too small to meet the current needs of the population and to meet Africa's economic and diplomatic and security needs as well. Recently, there was a report for the European Union of Mario Draghi, who wrote that Europe needs a stronger integration if it's going to effectively be secure and competitive with the larger entities, the United States and China, which bear down on Europe in various ways. And there's no doubt that that sentiment applies to Africa even more. For Africa to be effective in economic development, in finance, in monetary conditions, and in its diplomatic role, Africa needs to act truly as a union. And I'm very gratified, and I help to work on it actively, that Africa has been admitted as a permanent member of what was the G20. I insist now that we call it the G21, not the G20, because the African Union has a permanent seat. So after all, the number of permanent members has risen by one, so it's now the G21. But that means African economic diplomacy through the vantage point of the Union. And this, to my mind, is extremely important. So I believe the following. First, that Africa, as the world's lowest income region, has actually the potential for the world's fastest economic growth in the decades ahead. My belief and experience is that economic convergence is both necessary and feasible. Economic convergence broadly means that poorer countries grow faster than richer countries. Poorer regions should grow faster than richer regions. This is not automatic, but it is the potential. So Africa has the greatest headroom available for very rapid economic growth. And I believe that the right roadmap for Africa is that was shown by China in the last 40 years. Very rapid growth, reaching essentially double-digit rates between 1980 and 2020. And according to the World Bank data, China's poverty rate declining from around 60% extreme poverty in 1990 to less than 1% in 2020. This is what Africa can achieve and what Africa needs. In order to accomplish that, though, Africa needs scale. This will not happen 55 countries one at a time or independent of each other. This can only happen at the scale of the continent, because that will mean a bigger market, lower costs, more efficiency, more innovation for the large African market, more ability to set the global diplomatic economic agenda by speaking with one voice. And remember that Africa's population will outstrip that of China and India soon enough. Africa will reach around 2.5 billion people by mid-century. That will be considerably larger than India and China. And that means the potential for an even larger voice. So what does economic integration mean? Of course, it means the continent-wide free trade area. It means infrastructure, especially transport, for roads, for rail, for fiber, for power, for ecosystem management of the great rivers, for example, that are on a regional scale, not on a national scale. So PIDA, the Infrastructure Development for Africa, NEPAD, these are very important initiatives. It also means integration of finance, that there should be a continental scale financial system, financial markets, banking, and also that means monetary policy. So I am a big fan of the move to African Monetary Union. Of course, this has been on the books for decades, and it's been promised for decades, but I do believe that it is necessary in the timing of the next AU Commission to move to monetary union, to set a clear path of policy change, to create an African central bank, and to move towards monetary union. Is Africa an optimal currency union? Well, this was a long debate in Europe, but I would say that while the euro has been a challenge to create and to operate, I can only imagine Europe without the euro. It would be in far more vulnerable straits now. Many countries would have defaulted by now after the 2008 financial crisis. Europe would not have even the relative independence of maneuver that it now has. Europe's institutions would be far, far less effective, even though they're not as effective as they need to be now. So all of this applies in the African context at least as much. Monetary and financial union have their direct benefits of efficiency, lower costs, and so on, but they also have an enormous political benefit as well, and an international facing benefit that Africa would have its own lender of last resort authority, not having to rely on the the International Monetary Fund, or on France or on Europe in any way, because frankly, the international side is not reliable. Africa needs its own monetary authority in order to be able to exercise lender of last resort capacities and to be able to negotiate effectively as well with the international system. So my own view is that in the context of a single market, in the context of an integrated financial system, in the context of moving quickly, I mean less than 10 years, maybe considerably faster than 10 years, to monetary union and to an African central bank. I think that this is the groundwork for Africa's economic growth to be like that of China from 1980 to 2020. That is rates of between 7 and 10% per year annual growth, sustained over a period of perhaps 40 years. When there's growth at 7% per year, that means a doubling every 10 years. When there's growth at 10% per year, as China achieved, that means doubling every 7 years. Either way, over a 40-year period, you have somewhere between 4 doublings once every decade, or almost 6 doublings. And 4 doublings means a 16-fold increase of the size of the economy. It could be 30 times the size of the economy by 2063. And this, I think, should be the target and the policy framework and the policy choices on monetary system, a single currency, financial market integration, and physical infrastructure integration should follow from that aim. In order to achieve rapid growth, Africa needs, of course, much higher investment rates. And some of that can come from higher saving rates within the continent through an integrated financial system, introducing more systematic pension fund for the labor force, bringing all of the labor force essentially into the formal sector by using digital technologies, digital payment systems, digital tax and governance systems, and so forth, which can formalize an informal economy. It will also require Africa to be able to borrow more strongly in the international markets. Right now, Africa lacks, I think it's right to say, any country that has an investment grade credit rating. I'm not sure of that, I apologize. But there are very few, if there are any, that have investment grade credit ratings. By having an integrated financial system, an African central bank, I think that there will be many institutions that can be fostered to have strong investment grade credit ratings that can help to intermediate large-scale investments in Africa. I personally would like to see, for example, the African Development Bank operating at 5 to 10 times the scale that it is right now. The Afrexim Bank could operate at a far larger scale by tapping the international capital markets effectively. But that, I think, requires monetary and financial integration on the African side as well. I'd like to see investment rates of the continent at around 40% of GDP. That would mean basically a doubling of the investment rate, some of that coming from higher domestic saving, some of that coming from more international borrowing, but all of which would be possible, in my view, in a fast-growing African economy. One particular point that I want to mention is that to achieve this rapid growth requires integration. It requires the shared physical infrastructure, a single market for Africa. But one thing that's absolutely required is a massive upgrading of education across the continent. Every part of Africa should be aiming for universal completion of school, at least through the upper secondary level. And I would say at least a quarter, if not a third, of graduates from upper secondary going on for a tertiary education at this stage. So this would entail a massive expansion of education and skills and training as part of this rapid growth framework. And that too is going to require a lot of financing because schools are not free, education systems are not inexpensive, and that is one of the main reasons why still so many children are not even in school, though they are at school age. So let me just end here with the basic points that I think with the new commission coming in.
Professor Sachs, you have 2 more minutes to wrap up. Thank you very much.
With the new commission coming in next year, there's the opportunity to accelerate all of the dimensions of the free trade area, the financial market integration, the monetary integration, the physical infrastructure, and the scaling up of Africa-wide finance institutions like the African Development Bank and the Afrexim Bank. And this should put Africa on a trajectory of far faster economic growth. I would aim for 7 to 10% per year growth, consistent up to 2063, the 100th anniversary of African unity. And this, I think, would be transformative for Africa and for the world. So let me end there and say how much I hope we can work on these issues together in the future. And thank you for your patience and for inviting me to present today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey Sachs. And very much appreciated you could make the time. And apologies again for keeping you waiting.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So have a good time in Rome.
Thank you.
And looking forward to your report. Bye.
Thank you very much. So we're a bit later for our next session that will be chaired. So the next session is on multipolarity, the forthcoming FFD, Financing for Development and Africa's Interest. It will be chaired by Ambassador Segun Apata. Ambassador Apata served over 3 decades in the Nigerian diplomatic service. Since his retirement, he has chaired and served as a member on a number of high-level panels, fora, and committees. He is the current chair of Coca-Cola Butler in Nigeria and a member of the National Council of Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, MAN. Ambassador Apata's commitments to fostering Africa's development and promoting a business-friendly environment, combating illicit financial flows in Africa, and fostering sustainable institutions across the continent have further led him to serve on the board of a number of advisory and charitable organizations. He previously chaired the board of Coca-Cola Africa Foundation and currently serves on the board of the Global Financial Integrity, as well as the Global Financial Integrity Africa Advisory Group. To me, Ambassador Apata is one of my bosses. He's a member of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows chaired by His Excellency Thabo Mbeki. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Swad. We have challenged with time, so good enough. Everybody knows Charles, if I dare call him that. So I wouldn't want to bother you by further introduction. He's been introduced this morning, except for me just to say that he's the Executive Director of Ideas. And on my left, not in terms of ideology, but seated to my left is a distinguished former Minister of Ecuador, who integrated a lot in his lifetime, both government and non-governmental, international, march together as a formidable economist and policy person. So let me save time by yielding the floor first to Dr. Andres Arauz, who I would just say is Andres for this purpose. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you again to IDEAS and the CODA AU for inviting me to this conference. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've, believe it or not, been dreamed of having been here in the African Union building headquarters, and I'm very happy to share this with you. I come from a Global South perspective. I truly believe in the integration of the peoples of the Global South. I'm a Latin Americanist, but also from far away, a Pan-Africanist, and I see with a lot of hope everything that we can do together. So everything that I will try to expose today briefly is related to this deep-seated conviction and principles on the important need to have a joint agenda together, the peoples of the Global South, specifically from Africa and Latin America. I have a presentation that I hope you can see. I don't know if we can turn the lights off, but here we go. So I wanted to emphasize on multipolarity and the financing for development round that's about to happen, largely inspired of work that we've been doing in several spaces for a long time within the Latin American integration networks, most recently in the new International Economic Order initiatives hosted by Progressive International. I salute my friend here, coordinator, general co-coordinator of the Progressive International, David Adler, whom we worked with this together at the Cuba conference that several of you were earlier during the year. And I wanted to basically show some data points and some key elements that have to be reflected upon in the FFD conference that's coming up. Next, please. Okay, so just two key elements for this presentation, very schematic in terms of the technocracy of the balance of payments. I'd like to discuss a bit about the capital account of developing countries, issues related to tax justice, illicit financial flows, and international law on capital flight. I know that this is a key issue in the region, but also in my region. The importance of regional payment systems and how to go find a bit more space within the international currency hierarchy, and the importance of special drawing rights as a truly key instrument in favor of developing countries. And then just briefly mentioned what already former Prime Minister said this morning about the energy transition, the relation to multipolarity, and ways about this going forward about this in terms of commodity clubs and improving terms of trade, industrial policy, but also a very key and important issue that I always try to insist on, the need to exit the investor state arbitration system, both as part of financing for development, because now we have new debt related to these arbitrations, but also as part of recovering policy space for industrial development and economic inclusion of our people. Can we go next, please? So let's begin with tax justice, illicit financial flows, and international law on capital flight. Next, the tax justice issues, of course, have ethical implications, fiscal implications, resource mobilization implications, but I want to emphasize now specifically on the monetary and balance of payments implications. And let's remind ourselves that there is a specific illicit financial flows target in the Sustainable Development Goals. The indicator is 16.4.1, and it expressly says that we have to monitor and reach a target of the total value of inward and outward IFFs in current US dollars per year. Now, this is a very problematic definition of an indicator. And this is crucial that this be discussed at the Financing for Development conference, because this indicator has many problems embedded in it. One of them, even though it's already 10 years old, but the issues are still there. They haven't been resolved. By using the USD as a metric, we're already in the dollar-denominated world, which means we're all in the dollar center world. And as you will see soon, this doesn't just mean in abstract terms, it's dollar-centered, but it's US bank-centered. As we all know, every outflow in terms of the illicit financial flows out of the global south by accounting identity is an inflow in the global north, right? It doesn't go to Mars, it doesn't go to the moon. If it leaves the global south, by definition, it enters the global north. So this creates a responsibility as well for the countries that are receiving these illicit financial flows. So the responsibility can't only be focused or blamed on the countries of the global south where the outflow occurs, but also there is a level of responsibility, and as we will see, promotion of illicit financial flows from the centers of global finance that are mainly in the global north. The second important issue is that, again, because of accounting identities, if the indicator talks about inward and outward IFFs, if by total we mean aggregate, then we will have a duplicated indicator, right? Because there's outflow, gross outflow, and gross inflow. And if we by total mean consolidated, then by definition, again, it will be zero. So the indicator is poorly designed and doesn't help us reach anywhere. The other issue is that it's a metric in terms of yearly flows. So they say, we have capital flight that's, perhaps several $billions, $5 billion a year we're losing in foreign exchange from the south to the north. But this doesn't address the issue of all the other flows that happen in previous periods. So the stocks of capital flight that have already been deposited in investment in the global north. So we need to not only deal with reducing the flows, which is not really stopping the bleeding, we actually need to recover the blood that has already been lost over a few decades. Next. Here, this is a very important slide because it shows how the centralization of payments, international payments, creates this liquidity dependence. So when I'm making the point about illicit financial flows, but the reality of it is the practice of it, that when money is flowing out of our countries in the global south, they are not going into some abstract ether. They are being deposited in banks, mainly in these centers of global finance. In most of the world, the prime counterparty of financial transactions and the correspondent banks of our national banking networks are in the United States, primarily in New York City. In the case of Latin America, also the city of Miami. In the case of Africa, mostly the United States as well. In a few cases, still France, for reasons we all know in this conference. Next. Here's a statistic by SWIFT that shows how payments are actually happening in this region. And when a sending bank from Africa has to send money to another bank in Africa, in many cases, the finance counterparty is still in the USA. That's why it takes 2 to 3 days for a transfer to go forward. Not because the system is slow, but because of just the time zone differences don't allow for the settlement of the transaction to happen in real time. And this shows the huge dependence that we have on this centralization of payments and how this is related to illicit financial flows and in general capital flight, because banks, in order to settle these payments, have to have a certain amount of liquidity in the banks of the global north. So this creates this perennial asymmetry where liquidity is deposited where it is not needed. Next. Now, it's fine to talk about dollar hegemony and the role of the US banking system, but we have to put names to these institutions. And in highlighted in black, you will see the members of what's called the Wolfsburg Group. The Wolfsburg Group is a group of banks, 13 global banks, that are the main correspondent banks that settle international cross-border transactions. So when you make a payment from Peru to Zambia, it probably will go through JP Morgan, okay? And so these 13 banks have set up a cartel, it's called the Wolfsburg Group, where they set the anti-money laundering standards for themselves, the ones that lobby the FATF, the ones that interact with the OECD and the United Nations and the United States Federal Reserve and so forth, and are the ones that are the dominant players in the cross-border payments, and therefore the main creators of international liquidity. When we say that we have scarce currency, remember that money is endogenous. We are, and even when we talk about international money, it is just endogenous in the hands of these players. So we need to start moving away from abstract categories of dollar hegemony in talking about and start talking about specific regulation of these players that have predominant market power in the creation of international liquidity, including how illicit financial flows are transferred around the world. Next. Okay, and this is important because what has happened over the last few decades is actually the privatization of international reserves. While when the IMF was created in the 40s and perhaps for the next 20 years, what we had was a key role for the central banks and the network of central banks as the settlers of international payments. But after the deregulation and the liberalization of the 70s and 80s, we started having these correspondent banks as the settler banks or the settling banks for international payments. What this has meant is that the reserves, which used to be in the central banks and therefore official reserves were higher, have now been privatized to these correspondent banks that I showed in the previous slides. And I will show this with clear examples. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is my hypothesis of what I call liquid elites and illiquid states, okay, which is a different version of what African scholars have concluded that Africa is in fact a net creditor, right? But how is that distributed in terms of private and public sector, and within the private sector, the local elites? So just one case, Argentina. The elite's foreign liquid assets is 53% of GDP. So the rich people and the big firms in this country have 53% of GDP in holdings outside of Argentina, while the official reserves that are supposed to give this metric are only 3.5% of GDP. Again, liquid elites, illiquid states. This is data from the International Investment Position as published by the IMF. Next. Another example, Ukraine. Again, elites, Ukrainian elites, foreign liquid assets, 88% of GDP. And the official reserves of the National Bank of Ukraine, only 17% of GDP. Reserves have been privatized. So countries go into debt, money is created internationally, but it's not deposited at the central banks. It's kept in the hands of private hands and correspondent banks that are also private. So we have, again, elites that are liquid and states are illiquid. Next. The case of my country, Ecuador, the elite's foreign liquid assets, 47% of GDP, and the official reserves are only 8% of GDP. Again, and this you can see in our daily lives. You know, the elites have money of stashed offshore, but the government is illiquid, doesn't have access to currency. Well, there is a poor distribution of the actual stock holding of the assets abroad. Next. Another case, Egypt. This is actually a not so bad case where it's 7% of GDP is in the hands of elites, foreign liquid assets, and official reserves 8% of GDP. And next, we have the example of Ghana. Can we go to the next slide, please? Where they don't even have the statistics for the international investment position. But the IMF reports that there are large capital outflows, but there are no statistics to prove it. But it should be nice that they published how much is stashed offshore. And this is a problem that is recurrent in the region because we don't know how much is stashed abroad. And of course, this is a major issue in the illicit financial flows literature. Next. Now, this is I think, a fairly comprehensive proposal that should start to go forward and can be discussed in the financing for development round, which is analyzing and developing the Article 8.2.b of the Articles of Agreement of the IMF. Now, this was created when Bretton Woods conference happened and Keynes and White had an important discussion on this. Mr. Keynes said that, capital flight should not happen, and that if, countries, it was mainly thinking about the United States receiving capital flight from Europe, if they found assets that belong to Europeans, it should be returned to the Europeans so that the growth and development could occur in the region where the capital was originating from. Well, now we have this issue mainly as a global South issue. And we have an opportunity here to develop further what this article that was written, 80 years ago, but has never been developed thoroughly to find opportunities for repatriation or the returning of these assets that are in the global North. This article expressly says that if the currencies that were not compliant with the exchange controls of the countries where the money originated from should be considered unenforceable in the territories of any member, that is, in the recipient. So this means that the countries of the global North are also responsible for having received the assets corresponding to illicit financial flows and should therefore return those assets to the countries where that originated from. And I'm not talking about expropriation. I'm talking about still returning it to the, at least initially, to the owners of that capital, but in domestic bank accounts that themselves have correspondence with the national central banks and not with the international correspondent banking system, which is mainly privately owned. I say we need a reverse FATCA because FATCA is the legislation in the United States that forces every bank in the world, credit union, however small it is, to open a username and a password with the United States Internal Revenue Service and report all of the accounts that belong to United States citizens. If they require that from banks in Africa, Latin America, Europe, and so on, why can't they return the information of our citizens that are deposited in the United States banks? Next. So we need to make capital flight deposits non-enforceable, do a reverse FATCA. This should be discussed at the FFD round. And of course, we need to ask the IMF to improve its external sector assessment and recommendations. They usually focus on fiscal measures when there should be a stronger emphasis on capital account measures, including, of course, the repatriation of assets. The IMF was created for balance of payments reasons, not for fiscal reasons. And they should go back to its origins and say, hey, there's something that we have to do about capital account in the case of countries that need adjustment. Next. Now I want to talk briefly about the SDRs, which I think is a key instrument for financing for development. The SDRs, as you know, were neglected for 40 years between 1969 and 2009 when they were issued, and then again until 2021. And the SDRs are basically the next best thing to an international currency. Of course, the issuance heavily favors the countries of the global north, where, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, according to the IMF, only receives 3.5% of the total allocation. But as you will see in the next slides, it was the main region that actually used the SDRs. So we say it's not that much of a big deal that there is this inequality here, as long as the use of the SDRs is progressive in nature. Next, please. So one important thing is that SDRs have been usually conceived as a balance of payments instrument, but the IMF itself, for the first time 2 or 3 years ago, decided to approve the use of SDRs for fiscal purposes, right? And that changes that's a game changer, right? Now countries can use these resources for fiscal needs, including, of course, those of climate, which opens an entire new world of discussion when, for example, the current managing director of the IMF said there is no such thing as a shortage of money. That's a pretty radical thing to say from someone up there. Of course, they tried to kick her out 2 weeks after she said that. But it means that we can start using SDRs as a serious policy instrument to face the critical emergencies, both in terms of development, climate, hunger, and any other issues that the global community, that humanity deems necessary. Next. So one of the initiatives is to use the SDRs for debt relief. As we know, this is a debt-free instrument that would improve the external position of the countries, improve the fiscal position of the countries, as I have explained, and it can be used to directly settle obligations with the IMF, thus making this a form of debt relief. It's money that didn't exist before, now it exists, and you can pay off debts with that. There is criticism for the countries of the global north that say, no, it's not convenient for you to receive SDRs because, of course, the richer countries would lose the power embedded in the conditionality-based loans instead of the debt-free and conditionality-free SDRs. Next. This is a very important point, and it's that the IMF recently modified the statistical convention to say that SDRs are considered foreign debt, when in the previous statistical manual, they used to say that it was not foreign debt. Now, why they made this change? To try to push countries away from actually using the SDRs, to scaring countries away into using the SDRs, to say, oh, it's just more debt. It's not. To the extent that even the IMF in its previous statistical manual used to say that they are not debt. As you can see in the paragraph below, it says, SDRs are allocated, do not incur actual liabilities to repay SDR allocations. Now, this has been changed because they want to scare countries from using the SDRs. Next. Now, even though they have a regressive allocation, there is a progressive use, and I think it is important, especially if we act together as Global South, to spend less energy on failed SDR rechanneling, which is debt-based, and move into a new issuance of SDRs without pushing for the rechanneling agenda, unless we're talking about donations. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here is how the SDR allocation happened. As you can see, it was heavily biased in favor of the rich countries. But in the next slide, please, you can see that in the actual use, can we go to the next? The actual use was predominantly in the global south, mainly Africa and Latin America. So this shows that this was an instrument for development purpose, even if they want to frame it as a purely thing, as a purely, crisis instrument. In practice, it was a instrument for development purposes. Next. And as you can see here with these statistics, it was mainly African and Latin American countries that used it, both in terms of number of countries, but also the volume of the SDRs used. I'm sorry, I'm going a little fast because I know we are in a bit of in a hurry. And I'm almost done. Next. Again, we have the per capita active use of SDRs, where the developing countries were the ones that benefited most from the allocation and the use. Next. And the next one as well. This is a very important point. SDR rechanneling has failed. You know, rechanneling doesn't mean anything. The sort of the IMF narrative started to use this term as a euphemism, but it really is just more debt. It's just more loans, more conventional loans. It does not make sense from a creditor side. There are many inconsistencies as to why the rich countries would want to lend the SDRs when they can lend in their own currencies. Why would they want to sacrifice an asset if they can create their own currencies, which are their liabilities? And the demonstration of that is that after 3 years of the SDR issuance, only $6.5 billion worth of SDRs have been actually rechanneled, which is nothing. It's 1% of the entire issuance. And we've been working so hard to get rechanneling to happen. It's been a waste of time. We need a new issuance of SDRs, and we need recurrent issuances of SDRs if we actually want to get these much needed resources to the developing countries. Please, next. Though there's one element here where that could be completely transformative in nature, and it's conceiving the SDRs donations for debt relief. In this debt distress that most of the developing world is going through, you know, only about 26% of rich countries' unused SDRs would be enough to pay for 100% of the entire world's debt to the IMF and its trusts, right? And then the rich country would still keep 3/4 of their unused SDRs. That's the extent of how many SDRs are available if we truly want to conceive them as an instrument for development. You can even go further. With 33% of rich countries unused SDRs, it's enough to strike out 100% of the World Bank IDA loan portfolio. So the assistance and the loans given to developing countries by the World Bank as well. And this can be solved with a new issuance of SDRs to pay for the different interest that I have to pay the SDR department. So the technical solutions are, of course, there, but this means a change of the power dynamics in the international system. And this is the real reason why rich countries oppose a new SDR issuance. Next. And just 2 final words on energy transition and multipolarity. Next slide, please. One, the importance of critical minerals. As former Prime Minister said, and as I posed in my question, we need effective clubs. We need to create this effective solidarity mechanism where we can act together to try to affect the terms of trade and demand policy space for industrialization based on the endowment of our natural resources. This is a reality. It won't change in the short term. And the energy transition requires these critical minerals, right? Next. The problem is the club that already was formed is the buyers club. As you can see there, the United States State Department created this thing called the Mineral Security Partnership, composed of Australia, Canada, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, Norway, Sweden, the UK, the US, and the European Union. So they have a club to buy the minerals, but we don't have a club to sell the minerals. And of course, we are now being used basically as mainly suppliers of the critical minerals for the energy transition that are needed from everything from electronics to the solar panels to the technologies that are going to power the electric vehicle transition as well. And to the right, I don't know if you can see that well, but it's a statistics on just the 4 more recent years on ISDS cases or arbitrations against countries of the global south, precisely on critical minerals issues. So every time a country wants to either raise the royalties or to demand local content or to increase the environmental regulation around the critical minerals exploitation, the big mining companies, mainly of the global north, decide to file an ISDS claim, which then over the years becomes into debt, new foreign debt that countries must pay just because they exercised their policy space over their own natural resources. We can't lose time on this. It is absolutely crucial to have a proactive agenda, including as a part of the financing for development rounds, how to improve the terms of trade of our current accounts, primarily in the context of the energy transition. And this is what I wanted to share with you. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. House, for your presentation. I think we undoubtedly have all gained immensely from your research. Oh, sorry, we have all gained tremendously, and you've enriched us from the output of your research. Since we are working against time, let me yield the floor quickly to Dr. Bure. You have the floor, sir.
Yeah, thank you. For want of time, I would like to make just a couple of remarks in relation to the institutional architecture for multipolarity with respect to Africa, and then build on Arao's presentation, but also in just putting on the table a little bit what the kinds of expectations we may place on African leaders and but also of the global south in relation to the forthcoming Financing for Development Conference. So on multipolarity, this house that we sit is a reflection of both the potential as well as the contradictions of the political processes and the political institutions that Africa has built since the 1960s that would otherwise, the opportunity is, provide the continent with, and matching voice and influence in global debates. The African Union is perhaps the biggest political institution, structured institution in the world. It has the largest number of countries. It has built up its regional entities. It provides room for heads of states to meet regularly, but also to interact with civil society to some extent. So it should be a formidable political institution and voice. Before the African Union was established, formerly the Organization of African Unity, the key drivers of the vision of an African Union or unity were also important drivers of South-South political alliances, starting with Afro-Asian alliances that resulted in the Bandung Conference that eventually resulted in the creation of the non-aligned movement. So in the 60s and 70s, African political leadership was influential not only in promoting decolonization, but attempting to create a collective voice, not only of Africans about Africa, but Africans as part of the global South. I said that it is a contradiction, this house that we sit, because this house was donated by the People's Republic of China. So our inability to mobilize